RaiderNation, what's up? We're back with another exciting video today. The topic? A 7-round mock draft for the Las Vegas Raiders. Now let me say up front, I'm not always right, and I don't claim to be the smartest when it comes to these picks, but I've been following all the latest news, and I'm excited to dive into this. We're past the NFL Combine, the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine Bowl, and the Hula Bowl. Reports on these prospects are rolling in, and some players are definitely starting to climb or fall on draft boards. Let's get into it. Setting the scene. Top 5 picks. Here's the situation. The top 5 picks are off the board. CamWard, Travis Hunter, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, and Tetairoa McMillan are gone. That puts the Raiders in a really interesting position. If Mason Graham and Will Campbell go before the Raiders pick, that's a win in my book. I wouldn't draft either of them in the top 10. Mason Graham's tape just doesn't compare to someone like Jalen Carter or Cansey, and he doesn't bring much pass rushing upside. Will Campbell? I don't see him as a tackle in the NFL, so his value at this spot feels questionable. With those two off the board, it opens the door for other options like Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter potentially falling to us. Options at 6th overall. Now let's talk about what the Raiders can do at pick 6. One option is ShedeurSanders. He's drawn comparisons to Geno Smith, and drafting him could give the Raiders a quarterback who learns behind a veteran like Geno before eventually taking over. On the other hand, the Raiders could go after a wide receiver, running back, offensive tackle, or defensive lineman. In my opinion, these are the most important positions to address early. Running backs, while valuable, rarely get picked in the top 10. So, I'd focus on wide receivers, defensive ends, tackles, and potentially a cornerback if the talent is elite. Someone like Jalen Ramsey at his peak, for example. The best fit for the Raiders. If the Raiders want a right tackle, Armin Mabane is the best option in this draft. Yes, he's a little shorter at 6 feet 3.5 inches, but his 34-inch arms are more than long enough for the position. Arm length often matters more than height when evaluating tackles. For edge rushers, names like James Pierce, Mike Green, or Shamar Stewart stand out. However, there are concerns. Pierce has a history of anger issues, which led to him being kicked out of Virginia and even his high school. Mike Green has also faced similar issues, so both could drop to the 2nd or 3rd round. At pick 6, I believe the Raiders need to focus on adding playmakers to the offense. If Travis Hunter or Tetairoa McMillan is available, you have to consider them. Personally, I'd take Travis Hunter over anyone else at this spot. If both are gone, Ashton Jeanty could be a smart pick, even though running backs depend heavily on their offensive line and scheme. Learning from the Seahawks' strategy. Look at PeteCarroll's approach with the Seahawks over the years. They've drafted running backs high, one in the 2nd round and another in the 3rd, and invested in their offensive line. In 2015, they started building the O-line by drafting players like Damian Lewis, now a top 5 guard, and Charles Cross, a 6th overall pick who's thriving. If the Raiders want long-term success, they need to follow a similar path. Strengthen the offensive line and add elite playmakers. Building success starts with the offensive line. One of the reasons Geno Smith initially found success but saw a decline later was the deterioration of the offensive line. Injuries and failed investments contributed to the problem. For example, Phil Haynes at right guard never worked out due to injuries. The team experimented with different centers, but none of them panned out. Eventually, they let Damian Lewis walk, and their right tackle missed 2 years with a knee injury. If the Raiders want to build long-term success, they need to learn from these mistakes and focus on strengthening the offensive line. Bringing in Alex Kappa on a 1-year deal was a low-risk move, but it's clear the Raiders need to address this issue for the future. Realistically, they need 2 new guards and a right tackle. However, it's impossible to make that kind of overhaul in a single draft. In the short term, Alex Kappa and Dylan Parham can hold down the right guard spot. The Raiders could target a left guard in the 2nd or 3rd round, and then address the right tackle position as well. Over time, rebuilding the offensive line will create a foundation for long-term success. Ashton Jeanty, a generational talent drafting. Ashton Jeanty with the 6th overall pick would give the Raiders a dynamic playmaker for the next 6 to 8 years. Some might hesitate to draft a running back that high, but Jeanty has the potential to be a generational talent. Players like Saquon Barkley and Bijan Robinson are rare examples of running backs who can transform an offense, and Jeanty's vision, change of direction, and elite traits put him in the same category. Yes, running backs depend on their offensive line and scheme, but Jeanty's talent is undeniable. With Chip Kelly as the coach, his fit in the Raiders' offense makes perfect sense. He could be the centerpiece of a revamped offense, while the team continues to rebuild the line. Addressing the edge position. In the second round, the Raiders should focus on adding an edge rusher. Even though Tyree Wilson has potential, he's still unproven, and the team can't rely solely on him. Developing a rotation of 3 solid edge players is critical, especially with Malcolm Kuntz likely leaving after this season. His next contract could exceed $16 to $18 million, which would be difficult for the Raiders to match. Fortunately, this draft class is loaded with edge talent. Players like Donovan Ezeruaku, Boston College, Mike Green, Shamar Stewart, and Killian Williams could all go in the first round. Even beyond that, there's a ton of depth. In the second round, the Raiders could target someone like Nick Gorton, who was once projected as a top 5 pick before his stock dropped. Other options include Landon Jackson, Princely Umanmielen, Brandon Swinson, or JT Tuimoloau. Every year, there's a group of edge rushers taken between picks 25 to 45 who end up becoming impactful players. Nolan Smith and George Karlaftis are recent examples of players drafted late in the first round or early in the second who have excelled in the NFL. The Raiders have a great opportunity to land a high-upside edge rusher in this range. Landon Jackson, the edge to watch. When considering available edge players, Landon Jackson stands out as a high-upside prospect. While others like Princely Umanmielen, Nick Gorton, and Brandon Swinson are also intriguing options, Jackson's film showcases his potential. He brings consistent effort, a sharp cross-chop move, and solid pass-rushing skills. His tape against Will Campbell is particularly impressive, displaying his ability to challenge top-tier competition. Jackson's size, 6 feet 6 inches, and motor make him comparable to a player like Max Crosby. Although his first step isn't as explosive as Crosby's, it's far better than Tyree Wilson's noticeably slow first step. Jackson has the tools to be a long-term contributor, especially in an NFL scheme that maximizes his abilities. While some critics note that playing in Arkansas's 3-down defensive line system limits production, his individual talent remains undeniable. Drafting Jackson at pick 37 allows the Raiders to address the edge position early while developing depth behind Tyree Wilson. It also prepares the team for Malcolm Kuntz's eventual departure, ensuring they have a solid rotation of 3 capable edge players. The need for interior offensive line. If the Raiders pass on an interior offensive lineman at pick 37, there will still be good options in the later rounds. Prospects like Donovan Jackson, Wyatt Milam, Anthony Ballon, and Charles Grant could all fill the need at guard. Among them, Anthony Ballon stands out as an exceptional talent who could transition seamlessly into the NFL. Ballon's trajectory mirrors that of Tyler Smith, who dominated at Tulsa, excelled at the Senior Bowl, and quickly became one of the best guards in the NFL. Ballon has the physical traits, size, arm length, and strength to excel at guard, even though some believe he could play tackle. While his foot speed may limit his ability to play on the outside, his potential as a guard is undeniable. If Ballon is available at pick 68, the Raiders should not hesitate to draft him. However, it's unlikely he'll still be on the board, as he's projected to go in the top 45 picks. If he's already taken, the Raiders should consider other interior offensive linemen to strengthen the offensive line. Pick 108. Addressing versatility. At pick 108, the Raiders should focus on adding versatile players who fit their system. By this stage, the priority should shift to filling out positions of need based on value. For example, Chip Kelly could advocate for drafting another running back or wide receiver to bolster the offense. Alternatively, Patrick Graham might push for a cornerback or safety to improve the defense. The key here is flexibility. Whether it's addressing the defensive line, adding depth at guard, or targeting a skill position, the Raiders must prioritize players who complement their scheme. This mid-round pick is an opportunity to find a sleeper who can contribute immediately or develop into a key player in the future. Evaluating defensive backs and safeties. The Raiders need to take a hard look at their defensive backfield. With uncertainty surrounding players like Jack Jones and the departure of Nate Hobbs, it's unclear if the team has long-term solutions at either cornerback or slot. Although a safety was brought in, the current safeties on the roster are more suited for hybrid linebacker roles than pure coverage. There's a wealth of talent in this year's class. Jonas Sanker, Billy Bowman Jr., and Malachi Moore stand out as top coverage safeties. Western Kentucky's Austin Stout and Georgia's Dan Jackson are also intriguing options, with Jackson potentially available in the later rounds. Jordan Hancock and other cornerbacks in this class add depth to the conversation. The Raiders also have options to explore at quarterback, running back, and tight end. With rumors swirling about Michael Mayer being shopped, finding a tight end could be on the table. However, the team's immediate defensive back needs make selecting a versatile safety or cornerback a more pressing priority. Wide receiver prospects. The Raiders may want to consider adding a wide receiver in the later rounds. While securing one of the top 3 receivers in the draft would be ideal, the team could target developmental prospects after the 5th round. During the Hula Bowl, players like Kobe Hudson, Chimere Dike, Rock Taylor, and Elijah Badger made strong impressions. Elijah Badger, in particular, stood out on the first 2 days of practice before leaving, having solidified his stock. These late-round prospects could serve as developmental players who add depth to the roster. However, the Raiders must weigh whether drafting a wide receiver at this point helps them win now. Defensive tackle, a priority need. Addressing the defensive tackle position is another critical consideration. While players like Zach Carter, Adam Butler, and Christian Wilkins provide experience, the group lacks significant pass-rushing upside. Defensive tackles often take time to develop, but adding a promising player with long-term potential is vital. Anis Pebbles is arguably the best pass rusher in this class, boasting elite traits despite being slightly undersized. Junior Tunu, a high-character player from the Hula Bowl, offers versatility, while Cameron Jackson provides a run-stuffing presence with pass rush potential. Adding a defensive tackle at this stage ensures the Raiders are set for the future on the defensive line. Draft outlook and long-term planning. At this point in the draft, the Raiders need to focus on fortifying their offensive and defensive lines. Players like Ashton Jeanty and Anthony Belton are day-1 starters, while Landon Jackson could be a year-2 starter with significant upside. Jackson's tape arguably surpasses Tyree Wilson's, making him a cornerstone for the defense. On the offensive side, Belton would slot in as a left guard alongside Jackson P. Johnson and Colton Miller, creating a dominant trio for the next 5 years. A Kobe and Shaq-level partnership for the trenches. Pebbles, though projected as a mid-round pick, has elite pass-rushing upside and showed his ability at the Senior Bowl against top competition. Ultimately, ensuring the Raiders have both their offensive and defensive lines solidified is the key to their success. Addressing these areas takes precedence over other positional needs, including quarterback and wide receiver, as they build for the long term. Evaluating elite movement and drafting for upside. Anis Pebbles showcases elite movement and tape reminiscent of Jalen Carter's, but his shorter arm length may hurt his draft stock. Historically, players with shorter arms, like John Newton from Illinois, tend to fall in the draft despite their excellent tape. If Pebbles is available in the 4th round, the Raiders should strongly consider him. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt was a standout player at the Hula Bowl and later earned MVP honors at the Shrine Game. His versatility and performance make him a compelling option, even if the Raiders have already drafted a running back. Double-dipping at running back could add depth and competition to the roster. Strengthening the secondary. The Raiders must prioritize fortifying their secondary. Elijah Huzzie and Donald Fortune are exciting prospects, with Denzel Burke also presenting potential value in the later rounds. Despite a down season, Burke has first-round traits and upside, which may appeal to defensive coordinator Patrick Graham. Scheme fit will play a big role here. Patrick Graham's defense favors smaller, quicker corners with fluid hips, while PeteCarroll's system leans toward taller, lengthier defensive backs. Players like Eric Stokes fit the mold, but others, such as Joran Bennett and Jack Jones, align more with Graham's philosophy. Securing a versatile cornerback or safety who can thrive in either scheme will be critical for the Raiders. Adding depth at offensive line. In later rounds, the Raiders could target developmental offensive linemen. Tackles with starting potential are usually drafted in the first 2 rounds, while mid to late round options are often swing tackles or future guards. For example, Anthony Belton is projected to start at left guard, but the Raiders could still pursue a right guard or developmental tackle for long-term depth. A player like S.I. Pulu from Washington State offers intriguing potential. Although he didn't attend the Hula Bowl due to scheduling conflicts, he impressed at the East-West Shrine Bowl and has shown the tools to become a future starter. While late-round picks may not produce immediate starters, they can develop into reliable contributors with time, as evidenced by players like Spencer Brown, who became one of the NFL's best right tackles in his third season. Double-dipping at key positions. The Raiders should also consider drafting multiple players at key positions such as running back or guard. Luke Kandra, a physically dominant player who put up 36 bench press reps, is one of the strongest players in this draft class and could bring much-needed strength to the interior offensive line. Tyler Barron, with elite pass-rushing upside, is another player to keep on the Raiders' radar. By targeting players with high ceilings, the team can ensure depth across the board and prepare for future needs as they develop. Focusing on long-term development. At this stage in the draft, the Raiders must focus on players with developmental upside who can grow into starters. Whether it's addressing the secondary, bolstering the offensive line, or adding depth at other positions, the key is identifying prospects with the potential to contribute in the long term. The later rounds provide opportunities to draft and nurture talent that may not make an immediate impact, but can eventually solidify key positions for the Raiders' future success. Quarterback debate, development versus needs. Some argue the Raiders should draft a quarterback despite the team's current needs. Brady Cook is an intriguing prospect with potential. While his past season wasn't stellar, Cook's tape shows promise as a developmental player. If the Raiders still have 2 picks left, it's worth considering a late-round quarterback to evaluate long-term potential. Aiden O'Connell, a Josh McDaniels pick, might not be a long-term fit under the new regime. If the team opts to move on from him, drafting a player like Cook could be a low-risk investment for the future. Wide receiver in the late rounds. Wide receivers selected in the later rounds often offer great value and upside. Players like Leonte Wester and Will Shepard stand out as potential late-round picks who could eventually develop into reliable options at the X-receiver position. Teams like the Panthers have had success with undrafted free agent UDFA receivers, proving that top-tier talent isn't always necessary in earlier rounds. Wester, in particular, has been highly praised and is the kind of player the Raiders could benefit from developing. Taking a chance on Raheem Sanders. Raheem Sanders, a running back with a history of promise, presents a high-upside option in the 7th round. Although he tore his ACL at Arkansas and later transferred to South Carolina, his medical reports have been positive. Sanders has shown flashes of brilliance and could be a steal if he can stay healthy. The Raiders previously signed Dalton Wagner from Arkansas, and if Sanders can follow a similar trajectory, he might become a valuable addition to the backfield rotation. Immediate starters and key contributors. The Raiders could secure several day-one contributors with their draft picks. Jeanty and Anthony Belton stand out as players who could immediately improve the roster. Belton, in particular, has the potential to be an elite guard and could even transition to tackle if needed. Slotting him in at guard would instantly upgrade the offensive line. Landon Jackson also offers tremendous upside and could rival Tyree Wilson in production during his rookie season. While Tyree's development remains uncertain, Jackson's college tape and skill set suggest he might outshine Wilson early on. Focusing on developmental players. Drafting developmental players like Esai Pulu and Denzel Burke in the later rounds makes sense for the Raiders' long-term strategy. Pulu, who impressed during his college career, has excellent movement and could grow into a starting-caliber offensive lineman in a few years. If DJ Glaze struggles at right tackle, Pulu could step in, or Glaze himself could transition to right guard, where he might excel. Similarly, Burke's potential as a cornerback could flourish under the guidance of Patrick Graham. Even if he isn't an immediate starter, he could develop into a solid player in the secondary. Final thoughts on the draft strategy. Leonte Wester provides developmental potential as an X-receiver, while Brady Cook offers a chance to invest in a quarterback with upside. Raheem Sanders, with his medical clearance, could be a late-round gem at running back. Overall, this draft class addresses both immediate needs and long-term development. By targeting a mix of surefire starters, high-upside prospects, the Raiders could significantly improve their roster depth and competitiveness.